Welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, proudly presented by Venture Hunting and Outdoors. If you're like us and passionate about hunting, spearfishing, and many other outdoor-related pursuits, with an eagerness to fast-track your learning, then this podcast is perfect for you. G'day legends, and welcome back to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast. Today, James and I are sitting down for what is sure to be a little bit of a fan favourite episode where we dive in and answer your frequently asked questions. We've done this in the past, and what's always been a hit is answering your FAQs, as we like to call them, just because it seems that if one person asks it, there's about 20 or 30 people in the background thinking the exact same thing, which is super useful for everyone that listens to this podcast. So what's unique about this particular segment or episode in particular is that today all of our questions are going to be based around hunting and adventuring in the USA. So James and I are currently in Montana in the United States trying to effectively fill 6 tags. We've got antelope, pronghorn, whatever you'd like to call them, as well as a mule deer or whitetail deer tag, and then an elk tag each. So fingers crossed we can fill some of those and bring back plenty of memories as well as some epic content for you all. But what we're going to jump into now is our FAQ podcast, as we said. If anyone has a future podcast question that they want answered, please feel free to send it in to info@twinelements.com.au. Please use subject line FAQ. That just helps us sift through them. And the other mechanism in which to get questions to us is through our social media, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, whatever. Simply send us a DM to either Twin Elements, Ayden Doumtsis Outdoors, or James Doumtsis Outdoors, and we'll strive to get back to you there and then mention it in a future episode of the podcast. Without further ado, we'll get into the questions. Are you in the market for serious boots for all feet, terrain and adventures? Well, look no further than Lower Boots. We have been running the Lower Ranger GTX3s for many, many years now without so much as a blister. The team at Lower have extended their generosity to you, our valued listeners, and supplied us with a unique discount code. Use code TWINELEMENTS10 at checkout for 10% off your next order. Wear Lowers on your next hunt. Your feet will thank you.
So this one was sent in via Captain Natalie on Instagram, and she asked us, what is the general societal views of hunting there compared to here? I feel like we get a pretty bad rap here compared to places like New Zealand, which it seems to be very accepted culturally. Curious what the sentiment is in the US.
So I guess, to break down that question, Natalie, it's probably best to just address each individual country on its own merit. So hunting here in Australia, as you'd be very familiar, is often, misunderstood, and especially by the masses in the major cities such as Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. A lot of those people in suburbia, for them, hunting carries a bit of a stigma. It's generally done by very few and potentially not, deemed as necessary in today's current, landscape. I think what helps portray this negatively is that the media tends to frame hunting in a negative light. You never really see any news articles or videos or anything like that saying how good of a job hunters are doing hunting feral animals and utilizing their meat and adding to, the lifestyle of their friends, family, all these sorts of things, getting out adventuring, being fit and adding to their mindset. Instead, it's always, a negative connotation towards gun use, or animals that shouldn't be getting shot are getting shot, or some sorts of animal rights or welfare focus always seem to be the forefront. And I guess, there's little actual role or mention of the role that it contributes to the economy. That again, in Australia in particular, we're hunting feral animals and pest animals. And most importantly, I guess for us, is that you can actually, in fact, eat a lot of this meat as a wild sort of food resource. So particularly in Australia, one thing where it differs a lot to the US and potentially even New Zealand is that we have limited, public land. So a lot of people probably don't grow up and have the access to go hunting, if they're in the wrong circles from an early age. We've been very fortunate through our father that we've obviously inherited a lot of the properties that he used to go to, and then through developing that deep network of wanting to go hunting, we've now got our own properties, James and I respectively, that we can go and hunt and take our family and friends and whatnot. So I think that differs a lot in Australia to New Zealand. Hunting in New Zealand, for example, is very much more mainstream and culturally accepted compared to here in Australia. I think, partly over there, the outdoors and hunting in general, it's sort of seen as a natural progression that they're surrounded by it just in their way of life. And hunting, like fishing or hiking, is very widely accepted as just being a good thing that you do on the weekend. And I think part of that is because of the public land access. They've got lots of invasive game species, wild animals like deer and red deer, fallow deer, whatever, and venison is obviously extensive over there, and then that is then eaten and a common sort of filler of the freezer. So I think in New Zealand, the hunting in general is quite similar to Australia, and much of the methodology and practices and day hunts and backpack hunting, and you don't necessarily need tags and all these sorts of things, but the culture is very, very different. It's very much more so less stigmatized than here in Australia. And I think that's probably where it draws a bit of more of a similarity to the United States. And I guess generally speaking, even in the United States, it's much, much more socially accepted than Australia. I think particularly in a lot of the more rural states and more western states, such as Montana, which is where we're heading, even places like Texas, which have got a lot of suburban areas, but also a lot of people who love their guns and their hunting and their private land and whatever. In the United States, hunting is still quite accepted and celebrated. The main difference, I think, in America is that their history is very much like a pillar of hunting is in the Western sort of rise to civilization over there. So a lot of their, whether it's Theodore Roosevelt, some of these people who was like essentially a president have always been at the forefront of hunting and wildlife and the great outdoors. And I think the fact that they're hunting native animals over there and regulating them through tags and allocations and all these sorts of things, it's harder to argue with, because it's like essentially that those animals without hunters are going to be, their populations wouldn't be monitored. They wouldn't have all this funding and all that type of stuff. So I think the fact that, they've got tags and all this money going to wildlife conservation through things like the Pittman-Robertson Act, where, say you go and buy a backpack, you buy an Ebola stock pack from, a store over there, there's taxes on that backpack that go to wildlife conservation in particular states and for particular wildlife and all that type of stuff. So hunting, whilst people may not necessarily always agree with it over there, the evidence as to how it works and, all this type of stuff is there, and it's a bit of a deeper, I guess, history culturally than what's like recognised here in Australia. And I think generally Americans, as you see, you get over there to the airport and your taxi driver has a firearm in the car, like in the form of a pistol or something like that. And, firearms in general people have and are a lot more comfortable with, which probably makes hunting and rifles and bows and guns and things a bit more, common and probably widely accepted more so than here in Australia.
I think also just looking, at maybe population densities, like New Zealand, for example, like they've only got a population of like 5 million people roughly, or 5.4 million people. And I think that's a big one in the sense that it's only a small island. Sorry, guys and gals over there, but it's not the biggest island, but it is very rich in agriculture and natural resource, and they do have very big farming industries. And so a lot of people grow up, sort of more connected to the land in that sense. And also, like they go hunting with their grandpa or, grandma, or, they've done pest control, they're shooting on the farm and controlling possums or wallabies, especially the possums that we kindly donated to you guys all those times ago. and I think you've just got that closer connection culturally of like, this is what people do. And I see a similar thing in the US, specifically like what Ayden was saying in those Western states where, there's a lot of ranchers and a lot of people, hunt for their meat over there. And like, you've got this connection generationally and this accepted culture. Whereas I see in Australia, what's happened recently is we've got a pretty big population, 27 million people. And maybe even a few more. And I think the big thing with that is there's a lot of people now that the only thing they see, like Ayden was saying, is associated with the news. And so like hunting wise. And so there's not that connection to the land. There's not that connection to farming, agriculture, pest control. And so what they're getting is from social media and also through the news. And often what people, especially, with bows and rifles, they see only the bad side, and so they get this negative connotation about it. And so when it comes time to vote on political issues, they've only ever got bad, thoughts around it. So, they see that someone stupidly shoots a bird or a wallaby or something with a kid's bow, or generally it's not even a hunter, like it's someone that just shouldn't even own a bow, and then that obviously represents all of hunting. Or they see even in the context of us as hunters not portraying ourselves in the best light, where you've got an animal with its tongue hanging out covered in blood and there's blood everywhere in the scene. It's very easy for these people to see and get negative connotations around hunting. With rifles and gun laws, all you hear about in the news is how we should own less guns, and especially in Australia, how we're sort of losing access to having certain calibers and all those type of things, and how they can be weapons and dangerous and stuff. And all people hear about is, guns are bad and so on and so forth. And once again, like once it comes to political issues, all these people that have no idea about, the hunting culture and what it means to so much of us, they just have a bad, connotation of what it is. And that's why, social media has been good in a lot of ways of educating people and probably breaking into some of these communities within major cities and stuff like that here in Australia, and showing, how important that hunting lifestyle is to us, and how the actual killing process is a very, very small part, and all of the benefits, both physically and mentally, are for us to go hunting. So, probably just a little 2 cents, keep doing the hard fight and just portray hunting as best as you possibly can. Don't be afraid to be a hunter. Share the meat to people who are non-hunters, and Ayden and I, obviously, a lot of why we do this and have such a big social media presence, whether it's through this podcast or YouTube or Instagram, Facebook, those type of things, TikTok, it's to promote the hunting community, and it's trying to show hunting in the best light we possibly can. And we're sort of, I guess, advocates of the sport, and just trying to show how incredible this lifestyle is. And sadly, it falls to us, the minority, to do that, because there is such negative connotations within the population of that. Hopefully we can just keep showing hunting in the best light here in Australia, and we can catch up to places like New Zealand and the US and keep it as a part of our lifestyle.
Our next question comes in from Drew Caulfield. Drew says, is there anything you could advise us all on in regards to hunting deer locally, here in Australia, that correlates to hunting elk in the USA? Since doing it twice now, are there things that you have learnt about the elk that you think we could do differently in Australia on deer that might better our understanding or experience if we were to go to the USA?
I think for me personally, one big area that I've sort of focused on is, I guess, like over there, the densities of animals are significantly less. So on a lot of these privates, we've got improved pasture locally with, there's hundreds of fallow deer, and there's, heaps of red deer, and there's, thousands of pigs and goats and all the rest of it. And so we can be a bit lucky sometimes where we're not really forced to use our brains to go and try and think, okay, well, where are the animals? Whereas it's very different over there. A lot of big mountains, and there's not a lot of animals, and you often walk around scratching your head going, this looks perfect, but there's nothing here. And it leaves you wondering, well, when you see an animal in a certain spot, why is it there? And I think I've got a lot better over time at asking myself that. And it's certainly made me learn features that I've then been able to take back here to Australia and be like, okay, well, it's this, wind direction and this weather condition and this moon phase. And so I think they're probably going to be feeding here, walking through here, and bedding here. The hunting pressure is a lot here on the front, the crops at the front of the property, so they're probably coming down the night. They then go up through this little saddle here over to the next ridge, and then they're going to be bedding up here because it's an east-facing slope in winter. Just little things like that make you sort of think about these things, and then putting it into action and trying to prove those concepts. I think that's been a major breakthrough for improving in my hunting success here in Australia that I definitely learned a lot from in the US, just walking around and not really seeing much. I think another one sort of doubling down on that is scouting and e-scouting, especially before you even go to a spot. Or so you've got the sort of the live practical version where you're obviously out there going, I think these are the conditions, but also looking ahead. So, I'm looking at, okay, well, it's going to be actually a frost, and it's going to say that it's going to feel like -7 degrees. So there's not really that much point in getting there super early, because when it's -7, everything is going to be super tucked up, especially if you're hunting pigs, for example. So I'm actually probably better off going at like 8 o'clock in the morning rather than 5 a.m. and be sitting and looking on those east-facing slopes where it's going to be sunny, and then, here you go. Here's a big boar that you probably wouldn't see at 10 o'clock normally, just strutting around in the sun trying to warm up because it's finally more than a single digit or negative. So, just little things like that, like definitely e-scouting and definitely thinking of animal factors more so has been a huge benefit to going over there where, the densities are a lot less and it sort of forces you to become a better hunter.
I think a massive one that took me a little bit by surprise was just the calling strategy, I guess you could say, and just experiencing firsthand the nature of, I remember on this limited entry elk hunt that James and I did a few years ago, where I was along filming him, just the intensity of the rutting sort of elk herds, and being able to hear, I guess, unpressured animals. And we were following at any one given time, throughout this hunt over 30 days, a cow elk sort of mob of around 50 cows. And then to that obviously attracted a huge amount of rutting bull elk of all various ages and sizes and things like that. And we were just able to see and get a bit of an insight into sort of what occurs naturally in some of these really heightened rutting experiences. And you hear it. So like, especially, obviously as the day goes on, animals are going to bed down and you will have this lapse in calling and stuff. And then as the evening draws near and naturally one bull starts getting up and, wanting to antagonize the others and sort of see where everyone's at, he might let out a bit of a bugle, and then sure enough, about a minute later, another bull that you didn't even know was there lets out a bugle. And suddenly, as you're getting closer to prime time or dark or whatever, again, in an unpressured area, these bulls are really just like feeding off and amplifying basically their frustration off one another and saying like, no, you come over here. No, you come here. I'm not wild. I go there. I've got girls and blah, blah, blah. And then it just becomes this massive free-for-all. And I think learning and hearing like just how much, if there's nothing adverse going on, how much these animals sort of call, being able to learn and like work with this. We utilize this a lot back home with red deer stags and trying to call to them quite a lot this year, whether it was things like location bugles or roars in our instance here back home, or hind calling or cow calling in the United States. Just being able to like listen to and see what occurs naturally in such like volume and then bring it back home. You can sort of draw quite a lot of, I guess, similarities when you compare the two.
I think another one, not necessarily improving my hunting ability and stuff, but I think over there you probably do just get forced to push through your limits a bit more, whether that be mentally or physically. And it could just be even little things where, because you're so far into like even a day hunt, like you might have to walk 5 kilometers or 6 kilometers away from camp. And even just like little things like, okay, it's lunchtime. I anticipated going back, but I've run out of food and water. And, but I've got a bugling elk. So you stay out all day for that one opportunity where, in the arvo he sparks up again and hopefully you can get it done. And I think it just puts you in circumstances where you get used to being a little bit more uncomfortable, whether that be, pushing. And I think a lot of the time it's mental, because I think for a lot of people, and speaking personally, like your mental will crumble way before your physical. Like, I remember even like carrying things out now that it's like, you're like, oh, you can't do this. And you tell yourself, oh, I haven't broken anything yet. Like I haven't torn a muscle yet. So it's like, okay, I physically can do this. It's just that I'm telling myself that I can't. And then like even when it goes into like a day pack now where it's like, oh, it can't be bothered carrying that extra tripod. And it's like, stop being a little bitch, James. It's like, mate, you carried out like an elk quarter and a skull and a backstrap that probably weighed like 50 kilos. It's like, you can have a day pack that weighs 15 kilos, like you're just being soft. You know what I mean? And so I think it just resets the bar and expectations on what you physically can and mentally can do. And I think, it just sort of, it keeps you on the mountain longer, pushing harder, and just everything organically then becomes a bit easier because you're not making those excuses. Like you're like, oh, I could get there, but then it's going to be an extra 1.5 kilometers back to camp, which means I'm going to get in late. And it's just like, well, this could be your one opportunity on a red stag or a boar or even a billy goat, So it's like, get your ass up that hill or over the hill, and chase him, even though, yes, you're going to be an hour back later to camp. But it's like, if that's the red stag that you shoot for the rut or the buck that you shoot for the rut, well, you're not going to remember those hard times. And I think that's another thing that I keep telling myself is just like that 2 hours of sitting in the rain where you can't feel your hands and you're freezing and you're shaking, like, you do remember it as like, oh, that sucked, but you don't remember like that intimate detail of it later on. You know what I mean? And I think Ayden and I have spoken about before, where we ran up this mountain, we didn't have any food or backpacks or anything, and we, got in on this elk herd and we followed them all day. We didn't eat, we didn't drink. We were freezing cold, like we were shaking, every bone, everything hurt in our body. We were, cramping everywhere. Trying to get these elk, and then and I remember it now being like, yeah, it sucked, and I'm sure Ayden, can remember it too, but it's like you don't remember those intricate details where it's like every single muscle feels like it's trying to rip off the bone. And so I think it just resets the bar, resets the expectations of what actually hard is, and I'm sure that bar is just going to keep on going. But it's good for resetting the boundaries of what you can accomplish on a hunt, because I feel like we're pretty lucky and probably pretty soft in a lot of the hunts that we do in Australia. We're not really forced to find those limits that often. And so when you do sort of have a bit of turmoil or do have a bit of a hard circumstance, a lot of people back down from it, but it's good just being able to, push forward and push through it, knowing that you've done significantly harder things before.
I think what you're talking to there a little bit is also like in America, for us, we often assign ourselves a lot of time to go over there and get it done, whether it be 30 days, 20 days, 2 weeks or something like that. Whereas here in Australia, we often are doing like day hunts. The vast majority of people are doing an afternoon or a morning and then go back home and go back to their normal routine as well. And that's largely, I think, because we're hunting feral animals. There's no real seasons or anything except for like hog deer and species like that. Whereas in America, like we're literally fighting against a deadline of your tag is now invalid, you're doing something illegal, you can't hunt past this date and time and whatnot. And that just changes everything, where it's like every last stalk could be the last one. So you're definitely hunting to sort of kill a lot more, and you're not hunting. There's no like, oh, what ifs, or, oh, we'll just check if that happens tomorrow, or that bull's going into that drainage. Yeah, sure, it's a 3K loop to get there just for 5 minutes of last light. You kind of don't leave anything left in the tank. And my last point, I think, for me towards like, what the US has taught us is just the importance of like glassing and patience and just doing everything again properly. And elk country sort of taught me this most. And it's just, you sit on these massive vantage points on top of a mountain range that looks over, miles and miles of cover and stuff. And you're really trying to sit there and pick apart the terrain. And you're looking for these, bull elk in our example that are basically like a big blonde horse. Like they're proper huge with 60, 70-inch antlers. And you watch these animals go from sort of like an open little meadow or whatever and walk into a tiny little stand of aspens that you've been looking at for hours going, oh yeah, if there's something in there, I'll be able to see them. And you sort of like glass over it, looking into the bigger, deeper sort of pines and wooded gullies and things. And you watch this big bull elk move from like that little open meadow or ridgeline where you can see them. And he walks into a tiny stand of like aspens, for example, and just disappears. And I think for me, like seeing that literally play out hundreds of times in the US, same for a mule deer, where you're watching a mule deer and it literally just beds down in front of a tiny bit of sage. You kind of do that enough times. And now when we go back to Australia, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we did a glass, but did we glass it properly? And the same goes, this rut in 2025 for a big red stag. Like we watched multiple deer just pop out for 1 second through a tiny little, window in the bush. And by sitting up on that glassing knob or that elevated ridge on the vantage point and glassing throughout the whole day rather than sort of being back at camp. We were afforded with like more opportunities on good deer compared to, if we were back at camp. And I think just having that patience and ability to say like, nah, we're going to be hunting all day, and almost assign yourself a bit of there's not like tomorrow isn't just a given, like we're going to try and make the most out of today. Definitely has a lot better results for us with our hunting, particularly, we saw it translate to some really good success this red deer raw.
We have recently teamed up with Day 6. They design and build specialised equipment for hunters. Their arrows and outsert combos are hunt ready straight out of the box. Head to their website to check them out today. Or for our Australian listeners, head to Venture Hunting and Outdoors, who stock the brand.
Our next question was sent in by Ayden Faulkner, who happens to actually be James's partner. So Eidos has said, do you miss your girlfriend when you're over there?
Of course, baby. No, in all seriousness, it is probably, especially now, the hardest part about going away hunting over there, especially for such a long period, like trying to obviously chase our dreams hunting wise and twin elements wise, like media, collecting media and that type of thing. It is probably the hardest thing that we do face. Yeah, I mean, obviously Ayden will talk more to his lovely partner, but yeah, it's probably the person I miss the most when I'm over there, which does make it difficult. In the quieter times, you certainly do think about them, and especially when things aren't going quite right, or you wouldn't mind a cuddle. No offense to Ayden, but she's the one that I wish was there. But I guess sometimes you just remind yourself probably a little bit of that mental toughness or whatever, and you just remind yourself that you're sort of here to do a job, I guess, and these especially trips don't come around all the time. There's a lot of time invested into training and preparing, and obviously financially, just trying to make the most of them before kids and life gets too serious. So just try and obviously keep yourself focused. But certainly definitely do miss you, Ayden. Maybe next time we'll have to bring you along on the trip and get you over there with a camera in your hand, maybe.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I think my biggest thing when I think about things that have probably taken me away from my goal of going hunting, whether it's even for a weekend up here in the Northern Territory in Australia, and definitely a factor in the US, is just having someone that you are not necessarily dependent on, but so much of your life revolves around. It's not, I don't really miss mum and dad, without any offense to them, when I'm away. I don't really miss James when I'm away hunting. But I definitely do miss my partner, Alice, whenever I go out into the bush, even if it's for a day or two. It's just because you build such a routine and a lifestyle with this person that obviously then you go away and you're wondering just little things like, are they okay? How's their life going? And I think what makes it difficult is often when you don't have the avenue to contact them, or you're, again, like, don't want to be, even if you do, you don't want to be sitting there on a Garmin InReach all day when, you're trying to hunt and achieve this goal. And one thing that we've definitely adopted is being able to talk to them when we get back to camp at night, just to let them know we're safe and hear that they're obviously safe, is massive. But I think for me personally, like the closest I've ever been to, quitting or leaving hunts that I've, really look forward to and put a lot of time and effort into is definitely because of, missing your partner. As much as that hurts the ego to say, it's just one of those things that physically I haven't really faced any hunts where I'm like, oh, I can't do this because of that. But there are times where I'm definitely like, oh, I actually miss my life back home. And, I just try and, reflect it and say, I'm sort of wasting their time and their ability to afford us, a month away from home. And they're obviously taking on the brunt of whatever it is, paying the mortgages, feeding the dogs, making sure that life as we know it when we get back home is as close to normal as we left it. They're doing that at a massive sacrifice to us. And we're over here doing something that we choose to love. So by us going over there and on day 7 going, oh, okay, I actually miss them so much that I'm not going to continue with what I've set out to do, I think would be probably a bigger insult, or at least that's what I tell myself to kind of keep trying to do it, which I don't know if it's right or wrong, but it definitely, there's just so much, like the months leading up to a trip, getting gear ready, shooting your bows, going on the stair machine. Like you've already literally spent and invested hundreds of hours if you're like James and I and serious about this. So whilst we do definitely miss them, I think there's this bigger drive factor saying achieve it so that you can, go back home and not sort of spent the last month in vain. Not that, it's based on successful, shooting an animal or anything like that, but it's more just knowing that you gave it your all. And I think also the relationships we have, we know that when we do go home, we're walking back into loving partners that are very supportive of us no matter how we do. But yeah, to answer the question, it is extremely hard. It's definitely the hardest part about going on a hunt. And we do definitely miss them whilst we're over there.
Love you, Ayden. Question 4 comes in from Daniel Pedler. So, what permits are required when travelling with firearms between Australia and the US?
So this question, to be honest, when I saw it come into the Instagram DMs, was a little bit foreign for us, obviously, as James and I are bow hunters. However, I did do a little bit of research and try and speak with the team at Huntin Fool just to sort of see, what recommendations they had. And it seems like what they said and what was sort of online is very much sort of the protocol. And that is obviously for us to take as Australians or, non-residents, to take rifles over to the USA. And the way that they broke it down was basically when you're planning on leaving Australia, what you must do, and there's so many letters and different acronyms and things like that, but basically under the Defence Export Control System, so the DECS, you need an import permit, and they recommend that you get this first from the USA. So it actually is beneficial if you get it from the USA saying that you intend to bring a rifle into the United States. From there, you can then, go to the Australian Border Force and get an export permit, which is required to sort of legally take a firearm out of Australia, if that makes sense. So again, I won't mention who they're all through and where you apply and all this other stuff, but I'm just trying to dumb it down. But essentially you need an import permit to the USA, an export permit from Australia. Then I guess once you start, thinking about how you're going to be entering the United States and to get that import permit, you need to be doing things. So the big one is that you need an application and permit for temporary importation of firearms and ammunition, essentially by non-immigrant aliens or foreigners to the United States. And this is a big one. It needs to be lodged with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosive, which is the ATF. And a massive thing here is that it does take around 6 to 12 weeks of approval. So everywhere I read said that they recommend doing it between sort of 3 to 6 months before you intend to leave on your trip. And basically that's just saying like, yep, I, Ayden Doumtsis, intend to take a 308, the amount of ammunition you want to bring, the caliber, all that type of stuff. And it's essentially just getting all that lined up. The biggest thing when considering taking a gun to the United States is that you need to justify why you're taking it. And commonly this is for what we call sporting purposes, which is as non-US citizens, we must show that we're entering for like a lawful sporting purpose. So whether that's hunting or competition shooting, if it's competition shooting, it's as simple as, getting an invitation from the club or the organization where you're going to participate and shoot. For hunters, it's a little bit more difficult, and that's where you need to have a US hunting license. And these are obviously like issued state to state. And this, for us, for example, if we were intending to take a rifle to Montana, would be a wild, like a hunting license in the state of Montana, which again, you can purchase online in advance. So it's not that hard to obtain. Next, I guess, and one of the other considerations is just checking like the actual airline that you intend to use and their sort of rules. A massive recommendation for this is to always arrive early and give yourself plenty of time to navigate like any security checks and check-in, bag drop-offs and all that type of stuff. The biggest thing and what seems to be pretty common is that the firearm must be unloaded and then locked in a hard case, something like a Pelican case. And then the ammunition, which is usually a maximum of 5 kilograms, which seems like an excessive amount of ammunition, must be in its original packaging and separate to the rifle, but in a checked bag. So whether that's like a big duffel bag or something like that. And you've obviously got to declare that at check-in. I think a lot of people go one step further and take out like the bolt and store that with the ammo and things like that, just so that the rifle in theory couldn't even load a bullet should you have one. And then obviously once you're in the USA, good news, you go on your hunt and do all this type of stuff. You obviously just have to comply with all state and federal laws and transport the firearms, often, unloaded in a lockable case, as we've just mentioned, which is why I think taking that Pelican case with you is pretty handy. And then when you're hunting, you're obviously hunting, make the gun safe when you're back at camp or at the car or whatever. To return to Australia, you'll then need an import permit, as we said earlier, for the same firearm that we originally exported, and export documentation from the USA. And to be honest, you just have to declare it to the Australian Border Force at re-entry into Australia. And that seems to be the extent of it. Obviously, if you're taking like a firearm or something that's, illegal in the United States, which shouldn't really be the case, as they're obviously got a lot more comfort with ammunitions and firearms and things like that, that could be a bit of a hindrance. But from what I understand, that is pretty much the process, which is a lot more, I guess, tedious than what it is to take a bow into Australia. We essentially just declare that, we've got sporting goods and go from there, make sure that it's well padded and packed on our end, and then hopefully get it there in one piece is sort of the biggest thing for us. But it's obviously a lot more harder and difficult for you guys that are using rifles and intend to over in the USA.
Seems like a very strenuous process, and something I'd just like to add through my little bit of research. Obviously, people like bows, rifles can be shared a little bit more, but people obviously get very familiar with their scopes and, the stocks and how it feels in your hand and all those type of things, sight pictures. So I'm sure a lot of people would want their own rifles, but there is options to rent rifles overseas as well, which obviously you save a lot of, going to and from. It just depends, obviously, if you know people over there, but there is options to actually rent them over there as well, which, just to be mentioned so that people know that it is an option.
Whether it's hunting, fishing, hiking, or any other activity in the great outdoors, Dog and Gun Coffee is ready to fuel your adventures. Their preloaded drip filters are a game changer and help you enjoy cafe quality coffee in the wild. Their dark roast, the Samba blend, is my personal favourite. The legends over at Dog and Gun Coffee have extended their support to you to help us discover your brew of choice today. Use code TWIN10, that's numerical number 10, at checkout for $10 off your first order. The next question is, what are the season dates for all of these species, and how do you plan on fitting in opportunities for each within the archery season?
So with the big game combo in Montana, so the deer and elk combo, that opens up in the first weekend of September. So this year it's going to be opening up September 6th, and it will be closing in October the 19th, whereas with Pronghorn, they open up, I believe it's about August the 15th, and they run all the way through. So the plan for us, we land on the 2nd of September, which is obviously before the deer and elk season. The hunt strategy that Ayden and I have this year is we're going to be hunting a location that hopefully has decent numbers of all three species that we're targeting, being deer, so there'll be muleys and whitetail there. They're mainly mule deer, antelope, and also a few elk kicking around. So we've sort of done that for a couple of reasons. The main one being the filming opportunities. I've only hunted in this spot for a day, and that was a few years ago. And I was lucky enough to see, all three species, antelope, deer, and elk. So we've mainly, like I said, done that for the filming opportunities and just to maximize our chances. Obviously, with the bow, you can be on a stalk with a mule deer and potentially hopefully get it done there or bust it, just say we spook it and then look up and there's an antelope, okay, straight into the next stalk. Whereas a lot of other locations where, if we were to go into the deep pine mountains for elk and stuff like that, there is definitely deer there, generally speaking, lower densities. And there's probably going to be more elk there and probably bigger elk, but it's also you're sort of mainly targeting one species with not necessarily more opportunities. So for us, we're pretty much going to be targeting pronghorn straight up until deer and elk open up on the 6th. From then, it's going to be, no holds barred, just going for whatever we can, but we'll mainly be probably focusing on antelope and deer earlier on in the season until probably about the 15th, when the elk are sort of going to be, starting to bugle and carry on and rut from then. Not to say that if we don't see an elk before that, we're not going to have a crack at it, but mainly then sort of around the 15th, 20th, shift towards more chasing elk, and then have another about 2 weeks on the elk there. So we've given ourselves plenty of time, but we do have a lot of tags, and we are going to be filming, which obviously takes away from just pure hunting time. And obviously one of us is only going to be holding the bow at a time. So hopefully we can, fill all the tags, but just trying to be strategic and give ourselves as much opportunity at stalks as possible.
So James sort of alluded there a little bit and sort of answered this next question, but which regions of Montana are you looking at for 2025, and how does this differ to previous years' hunting? Are there specific areas to avoid due to hunting pressure or low animal numbers?
So like I said, we've probably gone into an area where we're hoping there's pretty good numbers of all three, but probably sacrificing a little bit on quality. Not to say that a giant buck or a giant antelope or a giant elk can't pop up there, but generally speaking, we're hunting all three tags are just general tags. So with the elk and deer combo, I think they give out like 18,000 of these tags a year for non-residents and residents like combo. A lot of hunters out there. Obviously, there's going to be people with antelope tags out there only that are chasing as well. So there will be a lot of hunting presence. But for Ayden and I, and speaking on behalf of Ayden a little bit, like we're going in there more sort of opportunity and filming than we are going to chase that one bull of a lifetime. Otherwise, we'd probably be doing this hunt a little bit differently. We're hoping to maximize and fill as many tags as we possibly can, maybe with a bit higher hunting pressure, but also trying to find those pockets maybe a bit deeper that people aren't going into, or, spend a bit more time trying to find, animals that are less pressured, and probably sacrificing maybe a little bit on quality and trying to go for quantity on this hunt. The next question is, how do you plan on targeting pronghorn? From what I've seen, it's typically a spot and stalk game in open country, or can ambush be effective?
Yeah, so that pretty much sums up very well. So typically, like from what we've seen, the pronghorn have incredible eyesight and like to live in very open areas. It should sort of be the rut come later in September, probably from the 15th onwards. So that might be something that makes it a little bit easier to sort of hunt these animals, but it also could make things difficult if there are, I guess, bucks running around chasing the female pronghorn and, not letting them settle. So with a lot of the other species that we're trying to hunt, whether that be the elk or the deer, at least during the middle of the day, in theory, they should bed down and be stationary so that we can use, spot and stalk tactics. Whereas with the pronghorn, if they're rutting and chasing each other around, it might be easier to try and find water of some description, whether that's a little creek or a spillage or some sort of like dam or bigger pool of water, and sort of nuzzle in, especially during the middle of the day, which, as we've found, with September in the past, it is fall and it generally is a bit more temperate and cooler. But during the middle of the day, sometimes you do get these heat stretches and heat streaks where, even a big bull elk, because we're going to be in the same sort of location where we are hopefully hunting deer, antelope and elk, might come into that water source. So it's just going to depend largely on what we're seeing and sort of experiencing once we're over there. But we're not really, striking anything out of, our arsenal as to how to tackle these creatures, because one, as James was saying, we've got a lot of tags, and two, we don't have, we have set out a month, but as far as, we might only get one opportunity on pronghorn, if any. So we want to just be able to say, yep, that's in a good spot and stalk location because of where it's coming down a draw towards a waterhole. If we can get to that waterhole first and sit there, it might be better. If we can, target it as it's coming down a game trail, then even better. Again, it's just going to depend on if it's one pronghorn buck or a mob of, pronghorn and a couple of females. So James might be able to add to this a little bit, but essentially it is most of our hunting whilst we're over there in the US is going to be spot and stalk and trying to work out, how to remain largely unseen and then get in front of animals or be able to follow them up to where we've got enough cover to get into that last little bit of bow range.
Yeah, I think Ayden summed it up perfectly, where we're not going to be ruling out anything out of our arsenal, whether it's going to be, an ambush situation on water, which is sort of the main one for pronghorn, in the middle of the day, or if we just do spot and stalk and we're, flat out running across the countryside trying to get in front of these things as they run around the place. As Ayden said, their eyesight is brilliant and they live in very open country. So depending on densities and depending on topography and stuff like that, we'll obviously mainly be going for spot and stalk, especially because they'll a lot of the time probably double up with hunting elk and deer and just being opportunistic. But yeah, nothing is going to be ruled out and just trying to be as effective as we can on this hunt. But yeah, probably going to be going more spot and stalk and trying to use topography and just natural corridors and that type of thing to be successful with the pronghorn. Venture Hunting and Outdoors is Australia's premier hunting retailer, with the mission to give Australian outdoorsmen and women the resource they deserve. Venture started from a team of passionate hunters and has transformed into a community. Through group events, top quality gear, exclusive deals, and expert guidance, Venture is more than a hunting store. Check out their website today to see what epic deals are available.
Are mule deer and whitetails in Montana found in overlapping areas, or should you plan separate hunts?
Yeah, so the beauty of the deer tag that we've got is obviously allowed mule deer and whitetail, and often in a lot of these places, whether it be in the mountains or more on the sage flats, you can strike either species. So whitetail and mule deer definitely coexist. We've got plenty of footage where there's whitetail and muleys in the same frame, but generally speaking, the mule deer like that high elevation, that subalpine area, and the drier sage flat country, whereas the whitetails generally prefer sort of the fringe country and lower river bottoms and sort of more thicker timbered forests and that type of thing. But yeah, they definitely overlap, and it's not one or the other to see, a whitetail in sage flats, or it's not. Yeah, you can definitely see mule deer in thick, heavy timber. So definitely overlap. It makes one of the exciting things about over there and having this tag that, if we see a big, nice whitetail, I'll definitely be trying to punch my tag on that, even as much as I want to shoot a mule deer. So just excited to get over there and have a bit of diversity in what we're going to be chasing. But they definitely overlap in habitat and, probably a little bit different characteristics as well, though.
I think also to sort of answer the question a little bit as well would be go back and listen to our, mule deer and whitetail deer podcast where James was talking with Austin Atkinson from Huntin Fool. They give a really good breakdown into what each species are looking for ultimately, but also different states to apply in. We're in Montana more so because of ease of drawing in our case and trying to get as many tags as possible for primarily, elk and mule deer. The pronghorn are definitely a bonus. But if we were to, as this question says, plan separate hunts for, something like if whitetail was our main objective, there are definitely other states, potentially even more on the eastern side of, the US, that would be better suited to trying to get like a true trophy representative whitetail. Whereas, again, they're definitely found in overlapping areas, which is part of what's really cool about this deer combo tag, as James was mentioning, is that as much as, both of us would love to shoot a whitetail, if a close to even representative, a mule deer, if a close to representative whitetail walk past, then neither of us are going to sort of, not shoot it if that's makes sense. So very, very excited. And that's just the benefit of having so many tags, I think, over there at the moment, is that anything's on the table, which is really cool.
So the next question is, how are you planning on utilizing and distributing the meat across the 6 tags should you get successful? Also, do you plan on handling the trophies for export back to Australia?
So as required by law, and something that we obviously try and practice here in Australia to the best of our abilities, all the meat from all these animals, should we be successful in taking them, needs to be harvested and taken back and looked after with all diligence. So we'll basically be butchering them out in the field, processing them, putting them in meat bags, and then as quickly as possible, James has a very good friend that lives in Montana who lives a fair way away from where we're going to be hunting. So we've actually communicated this to him and made a bit of a plan, and essentially we're going to be driving the meat sort of halfway back to his location, and he's going to be good enough to take it all and distribute that through to his family and friends, because they honestly can't get enough meat in the USA. As I said, a lot of these people only have 1 or 2 tags each year. So by us having a few tags and potentially having the means to get plenty of good protein meat and stuff like that, they're very much happy to take it off our hands. Our biggest thing as far as like utilizing the meat is probably going to be getting it off the animal as quick as possible. As we've said a couple of times, and what's been told to us is that it can actually get to around that 25, 30 degrees temperature wise in September where we're going to be hunting, which is quite warm. Obviously, it's almost comparable to a chiddle deer hunt. And if I've learned anything from the chiddle deer guiding, it's that meat in these conditions can go off quite quickly. So, whether we have to debone stuff, chuck it in a cooler with ice at the closest town, and then drive a few hours to wherever we need to get this meat to, that might be some things that we need to implement. But yeah, obviously we are hoping that we are going to be getting successful, and then just taking as much meat as we obviously can and are required to, and distributing that to our friend in Montana is pretty much going to be our ultimate goal.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to, with like 4 of the tags being sort of smaller animals with, deer and antelope, like we can obviously, take almost a full antelope and gut it, skin it, and chuck it in a 65 litre Yeti, just say, if we needed to, especially if we debone it and stuff like that. It's the same with like a whitetail or a muley. You could easily fit in one of those Yetis with ice. So, we can give ourselves a couple of days spare there. The elk are obviously going to be a little bit harder to keep refrigerated and cool, especially with the warmer midday temps. So that's definitely going to be one of these things that if you are successful, you're going to pack that out as soon as possible and then take it back to our friend's place. But yeah, definitely going to be managing the meat. Like our friends over there essentially can't get enough. Like it's a single friend, but he has such a large family that all love it. Like they'll all, as a family, eat multiple elk and deer and antelope a year. It's a massive, responsibility to them to take as much meat as possible. So we, literally take every scrap of meat and they, turn it into sausage and grind and, obviously slow cook and steak and all that type of thing. So we'll be making sure to get as much meat as we can, with as many tags as we fill, and giving that all to them. So there's not going to be a problem with utilizing all of that. With the second part of that question, with handling trophies and bringing them back to Australia, so my last 2 elk are still sitting over there with my friend, and I think probably after this trip, it's going to be something that Ayden and I will discuss bringing all those trophies back. If you do go over only just do like an antelope hunt or a deer hunt, you can actually bring the trophies back. You've obviously just got to get all the right paperwork from a taxidermist. But yeah, generally speaking, you're going to be sending them back, and that involves having an exporter on the US side that's got all the paperwork correct. They obviously then go through border security and quarantine, and then you've got an importer on this side. So to get a few skulls back, it is quite expensive. You're probably looking at a couple of $1,000s. But yeah, after this trip, where hopefully we're successful in a few more tags, plus my previous elk tags, probably due to try and organise getting those back at some stage. So for now, they've just been chilling at my mate's place, but I think they'll be coming back to Oz or down under very shortly. The next question is, what layering system works best for Montana's fall and the changes you see during the day in the weather?
So this one, we've always found that, good quality, ultralight sort of clothing is best. This year we're going there with the Numa camouflage clothing, which we haven't had in the US previously. We wore it exclusively over the rut here in Australia, and it worked perfectly. So pretty keen to go and try and implement that again. I think to our better understanding, and from what we've experienced in the fall in Montana, particularly during the month of September, is that it generally is called like a bit of an earlier season hunt. A lot of these archery tags fall in what they call the early season, with October, November drastically getting colder and sort of more serious in terms of like weather requirements. Still, as far as layering and what we're going to be doing is we're going to have some base layer merinos, particularly for up top, like as tops and things like that. I know that James loves his merino quarter zip pullover, I think they call it, by Numa. And he runs and guns with that as just his, base layer / t-shirt for the day. I love the Pursuit pants. James loves the Renegade pants. We've both actually gone with lighter weight pants. And again, we're not going to really be layering that with any base layers underneath, just because we don't think it's going to be cold enough. Should it get cold enough, James has I think it's the Vertex pants that he'll be layering or using as an alternative pants or bottom sort of option. From there and from that layer with the quarter zip merino pullover, we'll just basically be adding layers to that. So if it's a bit more mild, we might just add a vest. If it's more cold, we'll add a jacket. If it's colder than that, we'll add a puffy jacket, all these sorts of things, basically just to try and, adjust with that swing of the weather. But we're sort of anticipating that, again, with our layering and potentially, waking up early, getting to a vantage point, we're going to be leaving the tent pretty early in the dark. And even though it's going to be cold outside, we're going to be relying on our pants and, a single base layer to hike, get pretty hot and sweaty. And then as soon as we get to our destination on first light or just before first light, we'll be chucking on our warmer, clothing layers to insulate us from the wind and the breeze and all that type of stuff. And then if we have to hike or hunt again, we'll be stripping down, getting a little bit colder and just trying to balance that weather swing. Some added little things that we're going to be wearing are merino socks, which will definitely help with just insulating our feet and keeping our boots hopefully nice and dry and comfortable and all that type of stuff. Some gloves. We've obviously got face masks. And then, as we've said in previous podcasts, we've got the hat / beanie from Numa, which we've labeled the Heaney, which we really like. And again, it's just got like a bit of a brim at the front that keeps the sun off your face, but also has the benefits of, those beanie-like qualities that keep your ears warm and all that type of stuff. So there are a few of the things that we're going to be implementing. But again, it's all sourced and provided by Numa Camouflage, which we are absolutely loving at the moment, and definitely, going to be taking over there for this Montana fall season.
I think the biggest thing with this question is thinking of it as a layering system and like a fluid motion between all the different layers. Like what Ayden said, like we normally run a bit cooler on the bottom half, but definitely on the top half, like a merino base layer. And then I've got normally my, Vertex jacket, which is a bit heavier, insulated, water resistant. I've got, normally a waterproof jacket in my pants too, plus a puffy jacket. If it gets colder than that, well, it's pretty cold. But I think treating it as a layering system, and I think earlier on probably got mistaken, where it's like you really want to start, even in Australia, like it's 4:30 in the morning in the rut and you're freezing your ass off and you got to walk up a hill. You will warm up quite quickly. Like take your jumpers off and like start really cold. But I bet you within the first 100 meters, you're going to be puffing and you're going to start getting hot. And where we often make the mistakes is we get active wearing a lot of clothes, we sweat up a lot, and then you stop and then it cools off again. And then you're wet, your clothes are wet, your base layer is wet. And once that sort of cools down, unless you're moving, you actually freeze and start shaking. And then you obviously can get into some pretty bad situations. But yeah, just being very vigilant, taking the extra time to put layers on and off, definitely, is super important. And just making sure when you sit down and stop, straight away, first thing you do before you start glassing, get a jumper out, or maybe just cool off for a little bit and then have one sitting there that you can chuck on straight away with a puffy jacket, because you will cool down quickly. But as fast as you cool down, you will heat up when you're walking up a mountain or, up a creek system or whatever, especially if you've got to do a hike in first thing in the morning. So probably just a bit like learn from our mistakes. We're probably a bit ignorant, but just trying to be fluid and make sure you are taking off and putting on layers accordingly, and try not to get wet, try not to get cold. Because once you're wet and cold, it does hang around all day, and generally you don't get a circumstance to dry out, especially on those backpack hunts.
Know where you stand with Onyx, the most accurate GPS mapping tech for outdoor enthusiasts, featuring land ownership maps that work offline, trusted by millions of hunters worldwide. We utilize Onyx while hunting in the United States on James's elk hunt of a lifetime. Being able to plan and prepare for our hunts allowed us to go farther and hunt with confidence. The next question that we're going to tackle is, what's the best way that you have found to travel with firearms or bows from Australia to Montana?
So I guess I'll answer the rifle one first. Not that experience, obviously, in that area, but just from seeing people that have come over here from the US and hunted, and pretty well just anyone traveling, you're going to want a solid hard case. Whether Ayden mentioned the Pelican case before or just a solid gun case that obviously you legally need to be able to lock up, keeping the ammunition and generally the bolts separate from that. That's the big ones for firearms. Just making sure you've got a really hard case. With the bow stuff, they don't give you the added benefit of having another bag. So generally speaking, you've got to have one bag, where that's for us. We've been running the Hoyt payload roller, which is just a big duffel bag. We find that it obviously fits the bow, but fits plenty of gear, all our backpacking gear, all our camo, all the camera equipment, everything like that in there as well. So it's a nice big bag, and you can well and truly fit everything you need for one of these trips in there. But it's also padded and secure. It's not a rigid. It is, I guess, sort of semi-rigid, where it does hold its shape, but it's not like a hard case where it weighs a lot. So it's a good compromise, and especially once you've got all your clothes packed in around whatever delicate items you need. It travels really well, super well set up. So it's got a little handle and stuff and wheels, so you're not carrying it around everywhere. And had that for a couple of years, done a fair few international trips on it, and it's definitely the go. Another thing we mentioned is air tags, critically important, whether it's be for your bow or your rifle, just so you know where it is at all times, just for a bit of peace of mind, because you hear of all those horror stories of bows and rifles going missing, and you missing out on a couple of days of hunting. It's a lot nicer when you can say, hey, my bag's at LAX or San Fran, or it still hasn't left home and it's sitting in Sydney, just to give them a bit of a heads up and tell them to pull their fingers out and hopefully go and find your weapon of choice. So air tags, definitely a must, and just a peace of mind, and also obviously a tool to hopefully get you in the hills quicker. The next question is, are calling techniques for elk in Montana different to how you tackled the red stags this year? You were successful here in Australia. Does that give you confidence for the US?
So we definitely draw extreme confidence from the raw this year in Australia, where we were able to collectively as a team get a couple of handy mature red stags on the deck. I think just taking mainly from it the way that we were able to call and read animal behaviour in general worked really, really well. And again, bugles for locating elk, we used, or what we saw in the elk woods a couple of years ago, we were using quite a lot for travelling ridges and either doing a location raw for red stags, and we even branched that out to doing location cow calls or elk, hind calls. And I then guess both of the red stags that we shot this year during the raw, which you guys will be seeing soon as, YouTube films, we were able to hind call those red stags to within bow range, which is a tactic that we're going to, obviously implement on bull elk. So definitely a lot of similarities. There are a few differences as well. But, we might even implement, some natural sounds such as raking or scraping trees. And just, I think what we've learned in the past with bull elk is once you get them a little bit, entertained, you've probably done the hard part, and probably similarly to the red stags this year, where we were sort of here in Australia hunting, I guess, the top 1%. So the really mature stags, whether that was in New South Wales or Queensland, we were trying to target pretty mature animals that even if they're a certain size and length, we were looking at quite, I guess, we were basically just looking at their trophy potential and seeing if they're young, old, blah, blah, blah. So they could have been a really sizable animal, but we still might have passed them up. Whereas I think for me personally anyway, heading over to the USA this year, we're still targeting a somewhat like mature bull, obviously, but the expectation to shoot an absolute giant, isn't quite there, or definitely not as high, and we're definitely not going to be as picky in trying to find, like a massive 7x7 bull elk, or has to score 360 points or anything like this. It's just, if there's a nice mature bull walks into us, I think it's probably going to get zapped with an arrow. And again, being able to shoot, particularly like the day 6 shafts and the Cayuga broadheads this year on the red stags and have them work perfectly on front-on shots, which are generally less than ideal, but have both of those stags go, down less than 40 yards away. I think adding in the new bows and the fact that we've got these Hoyt Carbon RX9s and they're both shooting over 80 pounds now and we're drawing them back really well and shooting them really well, we've definitely got an edge of confidence heading into the USA. But I think the big country and the new animals and all this type of stuff is definitely going to have a way of probably, keeping us humble, which is exciting. But I think to answer the question, the techniques for calling red stags and the elk and stuff like that is definitely quite interchangeable. There are some subtle differences, but we'll draw on a lot of the lessons and things that we learned over the rut this year. Our next question is, what's the biggest mistake non-resident hunters make in Montana?
I think just here talking about generally a non-resident, not even from the US where scouting's possible. I mean, if you live here in Australia and New Zealand, like if you fly over there to scout, you're pretty dedicated, obviously earlier on before the hunt. But so for me, I think doing e-scouting and having a hunt plan developed, like a really robust hunt plan developed, is definitely critical to being successful on your hunt. And I think people, take it for granted and don't, like you want to be e-scouting, read as much as you can and try and find spots to hunt. And what I'll do is I'll find an area, and it could be somewhere I've literally never looked before, and just on X, I'll start putting pins in. So I'll be like, yep, good timber, and you'll look and there might be like a little flat bench there halfway up, and you're okay, that looks like a bedding area. And then you look and you're like, okay, there's a little pool of water there. So that could be where there might be wallows and water, and it's a good spot to check just to see if there is even elk there or deer or whatever you're chasing. And then go in and go, okay, well, I know elk need, some pretty good feed, being big animals and stuff. So I can see like 2 kilometers away, there's some meadows here that they're probably going to be hitting. And then that's where they're going to be, going up to. And because it's a southwest facing slope, it's not going to get a lot of sun. So that's going to be a good one for the elk. Or with the antelope, it could just generally be like, okay, there's some shitload of open country out here. So there's probably going to be antelope, you know what I mean? Like, but muleys, okay, that's really high elevation. Like trying to know those animal features, do the e-scouting and be like, okay, this is the first spot I'm going to hit. And that could be from talking to someone, that could be from forums, that could be from that you've been over there before. But being like, okay, hunt plan number 1, go into here, right? You've got 2 or 3 weeks. You go over there, you check the first spot, and then you go, okay, even though it says this unit has elk in it, there is elk, but they're only on private, and they're in the top northeast corner of this unit, and I'm hunting the bottom southwest corner 30 kilometers away. So I'm in a completely wrong spot. So then you're, okay, well, the next spot is 30 miles away, and I'm going to go and hunt here and check out for elk. And just being sort of like mobile until you find the area that has the thing that you're looking for. It could be elk, could be muleys, could be whitetail, could be whatever, black bear, I don't know. But just having a really detailed hunt plan where it's like, okay, spot 1, spot 2, spot 3, spot 4, spot 5, and just keep knocking them off. And I mean, like if you have to go spot 1 and you're lucky enough and there's elk there or muleys there or whatever, that's awesome. But generally speaking, especially on the public or the BLM land, it's like, spot 1, you're like, okay, this is a bust. Like there's no elk here. Spot 2, okay, shit, there is like no elk here as well, and then having multiple spots, because you don't want to get into a panic when you're over there and be like, oh, I've only had 2 spots and both of them are busts. And then you're sitting over there with generally limited service, or you've got to go back into town. And then you've got to try and find spots. You've got to go talk to people or whatever. And it just puts a lot of pressure. It just means you're not utilizing your time as effectively, which is obviously probably the biggest mistake. And I think another one is just being underprepared physically. Like people don't realize, especially from Australia, like New Zealand, you guys have some more serious mountains and bigger mountains, but definitely us in Australia, we really can't imagine how big these mountains are in some places. And I think we really take that for granted, just how hard, like even really accomplished guys that you hear hunting in the Hunter Valley or in the Alpine Forest and stuff, they go over there and on these hunts and they do a backpack hunt and it absolutely busts them. You know what I mean? Like it tears them a new one, and they go in there and like, yeah, it's fine. Like I hunt all the time and I'm super fit and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, it's just like a whole different level of hard, and it's a whole different level of big. And we're just not ready for it. And so I think, really just doing the due diligence and taking the time. And like, honestly, like you want to be having 20 to 25 kilos a couple of times a week for months out on your back, doing a stairmaster or going and climbing a mountain close to you, just to make sure that you're even somewhat prepared. Like, it's still going to hurt. I'm not going to lie, but at least it's going to hurt less. Physical and obviously having a really robust hunt plan is probably my two things that, people struggle and don't have set up before the hunt. So next question was, how much time should you budget for scouting before the hunt?
This question is going to be different for everyone. For James and I, we would like to say as much as possible. We got our pronghorn tags a little bit later, but we had said that if we do get them, we're going to go earlier in August and try and hunt pronghorn before we get to obviously hunt the season opener, I think, which is on the 6th of September. So we were going to use that time to obviously hunt pronghorn and then try and get as much, scouting done for the elk and the deer come the 6th of September. But as life would have it, we had a mate get married, and we've got his wedding, on the last day or so of August, which has obviously meant that we can't leave. And by the time we leave and have a couple of days of travel, we're not going to get to the US and Montana specifically until early September, which will still give us a couple of days before season opener for the elk and the deer. But again, it's not as much time as we would have liked to ideally, hunt a few pronghorn. But should we have not had pronghorn tags, I remember a couple of years ago for James's limited entry elk hunt, we scouted that for a couple of days before we actually started hunting with the bow in hand. And anytime you can do this and just rule in or out any likely country that you may have checked, on maps, whether that's Onyx or, anything like that, you can just go and actually put boots to the ground and look for rubs, look for sign, look for deer. And ideally, like, if it comes to it, go, oh, that's a bull that we want to shoot, or there's nothing here, let's make our next plan. And, as James just said, be willing to move to another spot and check out another spot and do these sorts of things. So it's a very hard answer or question to answer, I guess. But as much time as you physically can budget to scout beforehand. And again, if scouting looks like us hunting antelope but scouting for the deer and elk, then that's absolutely perfect case, to be honest. And then as soon as the 6th of September rolls around, which is opening for deer and elk, we'll be, moving from scouting to obviously hunting those two species as well, which we can't wait for. Are predators such as bears, wolves, mountain lions a realistic concern in certain elk or deer areas?
Abso-freaking-lutely. I from previous hunts, it really just depends. Like across Montana, like across the west, you hear of spots that are really high with grizz and wolves and mountain lions. You hear with other spots that aren't so high. I tend to be fairly alert all the time. And vigilant as you are. I saw something the other day just on social media where two hikers got stalked and someone was filming across the canyon of a mountain lion that literally went in, checked on these two hikers. They were unaware, just hiking up a trail. This cat got to, what would have been like it was in the same spotting scope, so less than 10 meters off these guys, sitting there watching them, and then, they just keep going up the trail and the cat sort of disappeared behind them. I can confidently say I've probably been within range of a mountain lion and not even known it, on some of the hunts that we've done, especially like the last place that had fairly high mountain lion numbers. In terms of bears, I've seen one black bear, thankfully never seen a grizzly. They haunt my thoughts and my nightmares. But definitely seen sign of both, big rubs up on trees, fresh as hell scat that scared the shit out of me as well, literally. And big beds, in the grass and stuff where you can see their hair, see where they've been lying around. So definitely always on the forefront of your mind, especially in grizzly country. You just need to be super hyper vigilant, especially obviously around carcasses, around my first elk. We went in there after to collect the meat. I'd left the carcass, and hung the meat upwind, and also quite high in a tree, so the grizzly couldn't get to it, and so they would get to the gut pile first. And we came in from a vantage point where we could see the gut pile, where we'd assume a bear would be before, and could see that it hadn't been touched. Not to say that we literally had, guns at the ready and bear spray. It would have looked ridiculous for someone that was watching us from the hillside, but yeah, just being super vigilant. And you just have to be over there. Like, there's a lot more stuff that can kill you. Like, we've got snakes and spiders here in Australia, which everyone talks about, but they scare me a lot less than grizzlies. Wolves, haven't had much experience with them. Never heard a wolf, never seen a wolf, never seen a track. Not to say they don't overlap some of the country I've previously hunted, but yeah, just I think a little bit lower densities. So yeah, definitely on the forefront, but obviously not going to let it get in the way of our hunting either. So yeah, that's sort of how I approach it, I guess.
The next question that's come in is, when have you found that the elk rut peaks in Montana?
So for me, my first trip there was a little bit early. I went on the 2nd of September when it actually opened. And across the Western United States, I should say, it like differs on spots. So try and get some like local knowledge. But even within Montana, Southwest do go a little bit earlier than up north. They're a bit later. But yeah, I went in super early in my first year on the 2nd and didn't hear any bugles, didn't see any bulls. And pretty much the first bull that I heard bugle, which was on the 11th, I shot. So generally speaking, yeah. So from about the 10th to the 20th in Southwest is sort of prime time, a little bit later, sort of the 18th onwards. But I would rather, now seeing and knowing, probably rather be later than be earlier. So if I only had 2 weeks to hunt elk, specifically, I would probably be picking somewhere around, that 10th to 12th to, 24th to 26th. I think you're going to hit the rut in Montana, no matter where it is, pretty good, whether you're hunting private or public. Obviously, it carries on and you get more activity with higher densities on private, but not to say that, you're not going to get good rutting activity on public as well. But 10th to 12th to the 24th to 26th of September, but not to say dudes are here in elk, bugle all the way through into October and that type of thing. So you do have sort of a bell curve where some go earlier in higher densities and stuff, or if you get the right cow on the right day with the right bull, and equally in October there's late cow cycling or second round cow cycling with bulls going. But that peak rut for me, you're going to be looking at sort of the second half of September for sure. And our last question of the day is, how do Montana locals feel about non-resident hunters? Any etiquette to be aware of?
So this question's definitely an interesting one, something that we can't really answer to the truest of answers, as we're not Montana locals. But if we were to obviously assume, then I'm just going to compare it to, anyone hunting here next to me, and I would personally see it as competition, which, hurts to say, but I think that you can, go into anything, whether it's sport or hunting or whatever, and see competition and just deal with it respectfully would be my biggest underlying sort of statement. So even if, I can't claim to know what a rancher in Montana feels or a hunter in Montana feels that has an elk tag, but me coming over there to try and kill an elk tag, to film my elk tag, they'd probably prefer to have the mountain to themselves. But as far as any etiquette to be aware of, I think it's just common courtesies, obviously being super safe and respectful of sharing that landscape with other people. Obviously, you hear a lot of stuff about, getting to trailheads and there's 20 cars sitting there, and then where do you actually go from there? You're all hunting in each other's pockets. That's something to obviously, stay away from. Obviously, in Montana and the US and a lot of the West, it's all quite commonly done for, us anyway on public land. So as much as, a Montana sees it as their land, as Australians with a tag to fill, we equally can see it as, our land. We've paid to play, in my opinion. So I don't think they deserve any higher level of, importance. It's just because someone's from Montana doesn't necessarily put them above us. Same as if someone had come over from the US to Australia and had access on private property or whatever and wanted to hunt, I wouldn't be like, oh, I'm Australian, so I have a higher right to hunt than you. But you do obviously get elements of this going both ways. Even here in Australia, there's often competition for hunting grounds and things like that. I just think no animal comes above, a person or a hunter's life or anything like that. So obviously if things get heated or a bit silly, then it's not worth it. But just, yeah, paying respects to people as far as etiquette goes would be my major thing, being extremely safe. It's sort of with the bow and being in archery season, there shouldn't be any rifles or anything like that around. But obviously, if you're a hunter with archery equipment going later in the season into muzzle loader or rifle, then obviously things like blaze orange come into play legally. And even if it's not legal, it might be a good idea if you're packing out an elk to obviously have blaze orange on, its headgear and things like that, just so other hunters know what's going on. But yeah, we have seen a couple of times other hunters. We obviously just went around them or sort of moved to separate areas. It's more of a thing where we don't want to be competing with other people. We would rather be hunting animals that are unaware and not necessarily have like a buzzer or a time limit to get in on them before someone else scares them or adds pressure or things like that or impacts our hunt. And we just, translate to that's how probably they would like to be. So if we see someone going in on a herd of elk and we got there second, then we would give them that hunt and hope that they would do the same. So I guess, yeah, this is part of a much bigger, ethical conundrum that is hunting, and how does, how hunters are often hunters' worst enemies. So this is just all bigger part of that whole discussion. But just, yeah, doing it so respectfully is probably the biggest thing to take away here.
So knowing a couple of local residents in a couple of states and speaking to them, hunters of that state will always feel, whether it be that they're competing for a tag for, a bighorn, a moose, a mountain goat, an elk, a muley, a whitetail, an antelope, or even a turkey, the locals, the residents will feel like too many tags are going to be allocated to non-residents. And that's just how it always is. The few people that, and they don't necessarily have to be stakeholders financially, but the few and minority of probably, I would say, more experienced hunters realize that, a lot of funding comes from these non-resident hunters as well, in the ways of, coming there, motels, fuel, buying gear. So a lot of these smaller towns and stuff like that, like their tourism and whatnot during hunting season can be quite big, and in some ways more so injected like into the economy than for non-residents rather than residents. So, and they realize that, like having a proportion of non-resident hunters is actually a good thing. So that's the first part of that. Once it comes to actually like, hunting on the mountain, then really it's like you've all got a tag and it's all very much equal rights. So then it just comes into respect as hunters, as Ayden was sort of touching on, where it's like, okay, well, I saw that, elk first and I was moving in on it. So like if you can see, someone that's moving in on an elk or whatever, then, you sort of, they have right of way, I guess. It's a bit hard sometimes where you both might be hunting a herd of elk and you don't even know that you're there. But generally speaking, yeah, you sort of just common sense, don't be stupid. Keep a controlled tongue and just be respectful, and hopefully, everything plays out there. But hopefully for us anyway, like Ayden said, we try and keep away from most other people. And generally speaking, there is a lot of overlap, which actually is beneficial, where, a lot of times I've hunted in spots where I'm looking for elk and there's people hunting bighorn or mountain goat or moose or whatever else. And you're like, hey, I'm looking for this. And they're like, hey, I'm looking for that. And you can actually work together, whether they are non-residents or residents, and just help each other out on the hunt. So a couple of different sort of answers to that. But I think overall, like I said, most residents probably don't like the number of tags that get given to non-residents, but the people with probably a bit more hunting experience and stakeholders understand that it's a bit of a necessary evil for the economy and also just the hunting in that area. So that's probably my 2 cents on that one. The Hunting Australia Facebook group is now a club that you can join. Members get access to discount codes from leading businesses. You can acquire your New South Wales R licence membership, and every month they run incredible giveaways with thousands of dollars worth of top tier gear, but also give away guided hunts as well. So if you want to learn from the best or go in the running to win some incredible gear or maybe a hunt of a lifetime, or just want to be part of the greater hunting community, make sure to join the Hunting Australia group. Use code TWINELEMENTS to get 10% off your membership.
There you have it, folks. That is our USA-themed FAQs episode. Because we've answered so many of your questions today, we're not going to do an FAQ at the end of the show. Instead, we're just going to sign off. So as you guys are hearing this, we're obviously over in Montana in the United States with boots to the ground trying to fill those tags, which we may have already done. So fingers crossed that we've had an opportunity on a bull elk, a muled deer buck, or even a pronghorn. So we're super keen to share with you what we've been up to. Unfortunately, we are out of service until October when we're back in Australia. But if you guys have any FAQs, messages, corrections, whatever it may be, and want to get in touch, please don't hesitate to do so. It's just that we won't be able to get back to you until we're back in Australia, as I said earlier. So fingers crossed, we've been lucky and we'll have some content to share in the form of photographs of trophies and things like that. But either way, we're going to be sure to have one hell of an adventure over in the USA. An event of note is the Wild Deer Expo, which is back up and running as powerful as ever. On the 11th and 12th of October, James and I are going to be heading down there to catch up with you all. There's going to be a whole range of outdoor vendors and booths there, as well as hunting, fishing, whatever it may be. So that's always a really good selection of, brands in the outdoor and hunting industry. This year it is hosted at Lardner Park, which is down southwest of Melbourne in Victoria. So further details to come. You can obviously just go and check that out via the website, Wild Deer Expo. But it's sure to be a winner. And as I said earlier, James and I will see you all down there on the 11th and 12th of October. We're really excited, and it's going to be about 1 week after we get back from the USA. So we'll hopefully have some stories to share with you all.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of the podcast. Ayden and I really, really do appreciate it. And yeah, we just got these content continually coming out across all our platforms, which we really do appreciate if you guys subscribe on here or subscribe on YouTube, follow us along on our adventures on Instagram or on TikTok, just to cover all the bases there. So thank you very much for tuning in to another episode of the Twin Elements podcast, and we'll catch you all next time.